This article deals with the various ethnic groups inhabiting the Caucasus region. There are more than 50 ethnic groups living in the region. By language group: people speaking Caucasic languages. Caucasians who speak languages which have long been indigenous to the region are generally classified into three groups: Kartvelian peoples, Northeast Caucasian peoples and Northwest Caucasian peoples. Kartvelian languages: Georgians, Svans, Zanzming-Raelians, Lash. Northeast Caucasian languages: Avar-Andic peoples, Avars-Andic peoples, Andis, Akvak, Karata, Botliks, Gardaberi, Chamalals, Bagvalals, Tindus, Zazich peoples, Tsez, Hinuk, Bezta, Hunzibs, Korshi, Lesgic peoples, Agals, Lesgians, Rutals, Tabasarans, Sakhars, Krits, Budik, Udans, Archans, Dargrans, Kinalug, Laks, Nag peoples, Bats, Chechenskis, Ingush. Northwest Caucasian languages: Abkhaz, Abaza, Circassians, Adiga, Kabardey-Cherkess, Arbik. The largest peoples-speaking languages which belong to the Caucasian language families and who are currently resident in the Caucasus are the Georgians, the Chechens, the Lezgins, the Kabardins and the Avars, while outside the Caucasus, the largest people of Caucasian origin, in diaspora in more than 40 countries, of the Circassians with about 3 million–4 million speakers. Georgians are the only Caucasian people that have their own undisputedly independent state, Georgia. Abkhazia's status is disputed. Other Caucasian peoples have republics within the Russian Federation: Adiga, Cherkess, Kabardins, Ingush, Chechens, while other Northeast Caucasian peoples mostly live in Dagestan. People speaking Turkic languages: Caucasians that speak languages that belong to the Turkic language family: Azerbaijanis, Balkis, Karachais, Kumiks, Meskhetian Turks, Nogais, Turkmens. The largest of the Turkic-speaking peoples in the Caucasus are Azerbaijanis, who number 8,700,000 in the Republic of Azerbaijan. In the Caucasus region, they live in Georgia, Russia, Turkey and previously in Armenia. The total number of Azerbaijanis is around 35 million. Other Turkic speakers live in their autonomous republics within Russian Federation: Karachais, Balkars, while Kumiks and Nogais live in Dagestan. People speaking Indo-European languages: Caucasians that speak languages that belong to the Indo-European language family: Armenians. Hellenic group: Caucasus Greeks, including Turkish-speaking Christian Greeks of Georgia, Urums, Pontic Greeks. Iranian group: Gilaks, Mazandaranis, Ossetians, Talish, Kurds, Tats, Mountain Jews, Yazidis. Slavic group: Russians, Cuban Cossacks, Derek Cossacks, Ukrainians. Armenians number 3,215,800 in the native Armenia, though approximately 8 million live outside the republic, forming the Armenian diaspora. Elsewhere in the region, they reside in Nagorno-Karabakh, Georgia, and the Russian North Caucasus. The Ossetians live in North Ossetia, Alania, and in South Ossetia, which is de facto independent, but de jure is part of Georgia. The Yazidis reside in the western areas of Armenia, mostly in the Aragat-Zotan Mars, and in the eastern areas of Georgia. An autonomous Kurdish region was created in 1923 in Soviet Azerbaijan but was later abolished in 1929. Pontic Greeks reside in Armenia and Georgia. Pontic Greeks had also made up a significant component of the southern Caucasus region acquired from the Ottoman Turkish Empire that centered on the town of Kars. Russians mostly live in the Russian North Caucasus and the largest concentration is in Stavropol Krai, Krasnodar Krai, and in Adygea, Georgia, and the former South Russian Caucasus province of Kars Oblast was also home to a significant minority majority of ethnic Germans, although the numbers have become depleted as a result of deportations, immigration to Germany, and assimilation into indigenous Christian Orthodox communities. People speaking Semitic languages, Caucasians that speak languages that belong to the Semitic language family, Arabs in the Caucasus, Assyrians, Caucasus Jews of two sub-ethnic groups, Mountain Jews and Georgian Jews. Assyrians in the Caucasus number approximately 35,000 people and live in Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan and southern Russia. There are up to 15,000 in Georgia, 3,500 in Armenia, up to 15,000 in southern Russia and 1,400 in Azerbaijan. They are an ancient Semitic people, descendant from the ancient Mesopotamians. They are Eastern Rite Christians, mainly followers of the Assyrian Church of the East, and speak and write Mesopotamian Eastern Aramaic dialects. There are about 15,000–30,000 Caucasus Jews, as well as descendants of Sayyid and Siddiqui, the people with Arabian origin, but mostly assimilated by other Caucasian peoples. However, some people identify not just as Sayyid or Siddiqui with non-Arabian ethnicity, but as Arabs. Karmic people. The Karmic people, or Karmics, is the name given to the Oirats, Western Mongols in Russia, whose ancestors migrated from Hungaria in 1607. Today they form a majority in the Autonomous Republic of Kalmykia on the western shore of the Caspian Sea. Kalmykia has Europe's only Buddhist government. By location, this gives ethnic locations about 1775 before the Russians came. All of these peoples were Sunni Muslims unless otherwise noted. In the mountains there were some pre-Islamic customs. NWCLS means Northwest Caucasian language speakers and NECLS means Northeast Caucasian language speakers. It should be noted that the linguistic nationalities that we now recognize are somewhat artificial. 200 years ago a man's loyalty was to his friends, kin, village and chief, and not primarily to his language group. The difference between steppe, mountain and plain was far more important than difference of language. Only the southern half had organized states, usually Persian or Turkish vassals, and few, if any, of these states corresponded well to language groups. Northern lowlands. The Turkish-speaking Nogai nomads occupied almost all of the steppe north of the Caucasus. In the 19th century they were pushed far southeast to the present location. Formerly part of the eastern steppe was occupied by Karmics, Buddhist Mongols who migrated from Hungaria about 1618. In 1771 many returned to their original homeland and they contracted to the present location in the far northeast, Nogais temporarily taking the place. In the southeast were the isolated Terek Cossacks. The settlements later grew into the North Caucasus line. There were a few Turkmens in the center of the steppe. North slope. The western two-thirds was occupied by Circassians. NWCLS divided into 12 Issa tribes. They long resisted the Russians and in 1864 several 100,000 of them were expelled to the Ottoman Empire. To their east were the Kabydians, NWCLS, similar to the Circassians but with a different political organization. The term Lesser Kabydia refers to the eastern area. South of the eastern Circassian Kabydians were three groups that seem to have been driven into the high mountains about 500 years previously. The Karaches and Balkars spoke similar Turkic languages. East of the Balkars were the Ossets, Iranian speakers descended from the ancient Alans who controlled the future Georgian military highway and had a growing Christian minority. East of the future highway was a north-south band of Ingush, an ECLS similar to the Chechens. The numerous Chechens to the east were later to wage the long Murad War against the Russians. For the small groups south of the Ingush Chechens see South Slope below. To the east along the coast were the Turkic Kumyks. Mountain Dagestan. All the peoples of Mountain Dagestan were NECLS except the Tats. In the northwest were a number of small language groups and Andi people, similar to the Avars. To the southeast were the numerous Avars with a Khanate at Kunzik who fought in the Murad War. Southeast were the Dagwa people and west of them the Laks who held the Kumyk Khanate. Southeast along the Samur River were the Lesguian people with many subgroups and then the Iranian-speaking Tats down to Baku. Caspian coast. From Astrakhan to the Terek River there were the Buddhist Karmic nomads. Along the Terek were the isolated Terek Cossacks. For the Terek to Derbent were the Turkish-speaking Kumyks with the state Ataki. The town of Derbent itself had a majority Persian population, as it had for many centuries, until the late 19th century. On the coastal plain south of Derbent was a mixed population, mostly Azeri, and further south to Baku were the Iranian-speaking Tats. When Baku became a boom town, the Tats retained a majority only in the mountains. The mountain Jews, who had a number of villages inland from the coast, spoke a form of Tat called Judeo-Tat. The lowlands south of Baku was held by Azeris, Turkic-speaking Shiites. On both sides of the current Iranian border were the Iranian-speaking Talish. South slope Black Sea coast. In the northwest the mountains came down to the sea and the population was Circassian. Southward the coastal plain broadened and the population was Abkhazian, similar to the Circassians but under Georgian influence. South slope proper. On the south side of the Caucasus the mountains fall quickly to the plains and there is only a small transition zone. The inhabitants were either Georgians with mountain customs or northern mountaineers who had moved south. The Svans were Georgian mountaineers. In the center the Iranian Ossets had moved south and were surrounded on three sides by Georgians. East of the Ossets and south of the Ingush Chechens were three groups of Georgian mountaineers on both sides of the mountain crest: Kevi, Kefsers, and Tashishans. The Bats were NECLS entangled with the Tashishans and the Kists were Chechens south of the mountains. Near the Georgian-Azeri linguistic border there were some Avars and Sakhars who had crossed the mountains. Associated with the Sakhars were the Ingiloya Georgian-speaking Muslims. In the North Azeri area were a few Udans or southern Lezgians and Lakija southern Tats. Southern lowlands. The western two-thirds were occupied by Georgians, an ancient Christian people with a unique language. The eastern third was Azeri, a group of Turkic-speaking Shiites under Persian influence. On the fringe of the Georgian area were Georgian speakers who had either adopted Islam or mountain customs. Further south the land becomes higher. In the west were the Laz people or Georgian Muslims. In Kars province there were Turks, Kurds and Armenians. The Armenians were somewhat concentrated in modern Armenia but were mostly spread out as a minority all over Asia Minor. There were groups of Azeris west of the main area who tended to blend with the Turks. The Kurds were semi-nomadic shepherds with small groups in various places and concentrations in Kars province and Nakhchivan. In the far southeast were the Iranian Talish. Gallery.